Okay, we left off on Ayin Aleph. Sorry, Reb Naftali, I forgot to press record on Friday. So if you wanted to see where we got up to, we're on Ayin Aleph, and we were up to Amri Bishlem Avodah Zarah V'Shar Niskal. It's like 4 lines from the wide lines. What was going on here? Well, first of all, we thank Hashem that we're able to learn every day, and then the schus of our learning. Should have the Beis Hamikdash immediately. Okay, so we were learning that if someone shechts an animal after he steals it, he has to pay 4 or 5 times. What happens if he shechts it on Yom Kippur? So we said he also has to pay 4 or 5 times. 1 second. Why should he have to pay 4 or 5 times? It should be Kamma Daf. He should get the more severe punishment, which is lashes. So he said, no, we're following the view of Reb Meir. Reb Meir holds that you can get lashes and a lesser punishment together. So if it's Reb Meir, then why didn't the Mishnah tell me that if you slaughters it on Shabbos, he should also have to pay the 4 or 5 times, because Reb Meir also holds that you have to pay that you can, even with capital punishment, you have the payments. Well, the Gemara says we answered that there was someone else was doing the slaughtering. Shabbos Chayim Misa. It lashes. Right. So we answered that someone else was doing the slaughtering. We said, but 1 second, how does it work? Someone else does the slaughtering. That means he has a sheichet, that's a shliach. And then he has to do the payment when someone else does the slaughtering. We said, yeah, that's how it works. Just like when you sell an item, you need someone else there to be the purchaser. So when you slaughter it, you can have someone else there that's doing the slaughtering. Okay. We asked, but how is it possible that something that he does himself is going to be exempt? And if a shliach does it, it's going to be chayiv. Does that work? We say, yeah, that's going to work. But because it's not that he's exempt when he does it himself. He's not really exempt. It's just that we give him a more severe punishment, so we don't give him the lesser punishment. But that doesn't mean he's exempt. That was all according to Reb Meir, where Reb Meir says that you have to pay 4 or 5 times, even when it was slaughtered on Shabbos. What about the Chachamim? Chachamim said that he's exempt if it's slaughtered on Shabbos. Gemara says, why is he exempt? He said he's exempt because it follows the opinion of Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon holds that shchita sheina ruya lo shmei shchita. Any shchita that's not acceptable is not considered a shchita at all, and therefore he doesn't have to pay. Okay, now the Gemara says, why is the shchita not acceptable? It was slaughtered on Shabbos, but okay, it's a prohibition, but it doesn't mean the shchita is not good. You look at the neck of the animal, you check the knife, the shchita was good. What's the problem? So this is what we're holding. We said, Bishleim Amri. They said like this, Bishleim Avodah Zarah V'Shar Niskal. There were 2 other cases over there. If it was the ox that he slaughtered after he stole it, was slaughtered for Avodah Zarah, or it was an ox that was Asr B'Hana, because it was a Shara Niskal, it was prohibited to have any benefit from, because it had already gored 3 times and killed a man. So it's does it have to gore 3 times? No, that's only for kefa. Shar Niskal means anytime it gored, anytime it killed a man, the ox gets put to death. So therefore, it's prohibited to have any benefit from it. So we understand why it's considered shchita sheina ruya. Shchita sheina ruya here. It's a shchita that's not fit for consumption. It's not fit for consumption because it's either prohibited for one reason or another, right? Either it's prohibited because of idolatry, or it's prohibited because it's a shar niskal.
If you slaughtered the animal on Shabbos, but there weren't no witnesses, then you would have to pay 4 or 5 times. Because the slaughter anyway, we just don't know if it was on Shabbos.
Oh no, 1 second. So regarding the witnesses to the slaughtering on Shabbos, that wouldn't make a difference if he has the capital punishment, if it's considered a capital punishment case.
But
He won't get capital punishment unless there's witnesses there.
yeah, right.
But the case is still a capital punishment case, and he would be exempt. Now, it can't be a case where there was no witnesses, because when he shows up in court and he says, "I admit to the fact that I slaughtered it, and I have to pay 4 or 5 times," he's exempt from paying, because if you admit, you're exempt from any penalties. So it has to be that there's witnesses. Now, if there's witnesses, but then we're back to the whole thing. But it doesn't matter. The witnesses will only be relevant for the fine. The problem over here is El Shabbos Shchita Riyeh. But if you shechts on Shabbos, it's permissible to eat it. The Tanana was taught in the Mishnah. Sheichet b'Shabbos of Yom Kippurim. If someone slaughters on Shabbos, non Yom Kippur, Afal Pishin Mischai B'Nafshay, even though there's capital punishment, but Shchita Sekshera, the Shchita is still kosher. There's a discussion if the shchita should become invalid because shechting an animal by someone that's a machal Shabbos. How do you know he's a machal Shabbos? Well, right now he became a machal Shabbos. Or maybe we say no. His next shchita would be. But here we're not talking about the sheichet. Here we're talking about the slaughtering, right? Is it kosher when it gets slaughtered on Shabbos? And the answer is yes. So why are we saying that it's not a valid shchita? And it's following the view of Reb Shimon, that Reb Shimon says that you can't, it's not considered a valid shchita, therefore you don't have to pay the 4 or 5 times. So it says like this: Amri Savalak Rabbi Yochanan Asandler. This opinion follows the view of Rabbi Yochanan Asandler. Now, the Tanana was taught in the Mishnah, there's a Mishnah in Shabbos, it's quoted in different places. It goes like this. It's highly complex, the details of this Mishnah, but the logic is easy. It says, Hamavashal b'Shabbos. Someone cooks on Shabbos. So it goes like this. How do you cook on Shabbos? If it was unintentional, if it's b'shaygeg, so yoichal, he's allowed to eat it. Even he himself is allowed to eat it, even on Shabbos, according to this first opinion. But if it was intentional, lo yoichal, then he's not allowed to eat it on Shabbos. It was intentional, so he's not allowed to eat it, nor is anyone else allowed to eat it. I'm adding in according to the way it's explained. So the difference over here, according to Rav Meir, is b'shaygeg or b'mezid, it's either absolutely permitted or absolutely prohibited. That was on Shabbos itself. Rav Meir is not discussing after Shabbos. After Shabbos, according to Rav Meir, it probably becomes permissible for everyone. Rabbi Yehuda says, b'shaygeg geichal b'maitzi Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda is one step up. He says if it's done unintentional, then he's not allowed to eat it on Shabbos, even though it was not unintentional. But the person himself that did the cooking, he has to wait till after Shabbos to eat it. But Mezid, if it was intentional, then he's never allowed to eat it. The only thing is, according to Rabbi Yehuda, others that it was not cooked for them would yes be allowed to eat it. Rabbi Yochanan Asandler says, this is the opinion that we're looking for. If it was done unintentionally, others can eat it after Shabbos if it was unintentional. Not him. For him, it's always going to be forbidden. But for others, after Shabbos is permissible. And b'mezid it's not permissible to anyone, not him and not for others. We have the pshat. Why is it considered a invalid slaughtering? Because Rabbi Yochanan Asandler says that if you shecht on Shabbos, no one's allowed to eat it, ever. My time with Rabbi Yochanan Asandler, so together with Rabbi Yochanan Asandler and Reb Shimon, it's not considered, you slaughtered on Shabbos, it's not considered slaughtering, so he wouldn't have to pay the 4 or 5 times.
They talk about the time that the person saved, like.
That's when a non-Jew does it. That's if a non-Jew cooks here. They have to wait Kadesh Yas. Yeah. I think so, right? When do you have to? What's the rule of Kadesh Yas? I think it's when a non-Jew cooks. I think that was the rule. Okay. My time there, Rabbi Yochanan Asandler. Where do you learn that in those books, in the Shabbos books?
It's a lot of details.
Yeah, it's a lot of detail. So what's the explanation of Rabbi Yochanan Sandler? Rabbi Chia taught at the entrance to the Bein Asiyah, to the house of the Nasi. What was he doing at the entrance way of the house? I don't know. Remember, it says over there why he was standing at the entrance.
It says here that
He was the Nasi.
custom. It says that he taught at the entrance of the house.
Why was he at the entrance?
Okay. It was the custom of the Moraim of Eretz Israel to use the house of the Nazi as a base for imparting significant Torah rulings to the masses.
That explains the house of the Nasi. Doesn't explain why it's at the entrance. Okay. It says like this. I'm sorry?
It says to the masses. So
Oh, maybe he was standing on the front and everyone was outside.
yeah.
He was standing as if there was like those brownstone houses. You walk up steps and everyone.
Kind of like the White House.
You turn around and I don't know if he's teaching inside or if he's teaching outside. You want to say he's teaching outside?
I would say.
Okay. It says, you should guard the Shabbos because it's holy for you. Just like holy is consecrated items is prohibited to eat. So too, anything that's done on Shabbos in a prohibited manner is prohibited to eat. So let it be asr ba'ana as well. You can't have other benefits from it. It says lachem. That means it's for you. That means it belongs to you. Okay. Maybe that should apply even if it was done unintentionally on Shabbos. As it says, those that violate it, mais yumas are put to death. That's only if it's done intentional, but not unintentional. So Rabbi Yochanan Sandler's rule would only apply if it's intentional. He knows it's Shabbos, he knows it's prohibited, and he cooks. It would never be permissible for anyone.
So we're applying this to shechting.
We're applying this to shechting. The ganev that's slaughtered on Shabbos, he doesn't have to pay the 4 or 5 times because it's prohibited to eat that food. It's not considered a valid
No, 4 or 5 times is only if he shechted it,
or sold it. Here he shechted it, and it wasn't Shabbos.
But if he stole it, he doesn't have to give back 4 or 5.
Stealing it, he only requires double. So he has to pay double. He doesn't have to pay the 4 or 5 times because it was slaughtered on Shabbos. Think about Rav Acha and Ravina. Machlekes between Rav Acha and Ravina. One says that this concept of not having benefit from food, not eating food that was cooked on Shabbos is a biblical prohibition, biblical law. One says it's not biblical; it's only rabbinic. We just explained the opinion that says that it's biblical. You brought the verse that says that it's comparable to something that's consecrated, which means that you can't eat it. Mandam derabanan, one that says it's rabbanan amakra, he says, Kodesh who Kodesh mean mice of Kodesh. Shabbos is holy, but not the work of Shabbos is holy. That means that if someone does a prohibited act on Shabbos, it doesn't become prohibited to use that word, what was done. According to the one that says that the pasuk that we brought, it tells me that it's a deraisa amtulahachi, and therefore pachi rabbanan. That's why the rabbanan say that someone that thefts on Shabbos doesn't have to pay the 4 or 5 times because the work was done on Shabbos and it's not considered a proper shechita. And we'll follow the view of Reb Shimon that says anytime the shechita is not acceptable, you don't have to pay 4 or 5 times. It's not considered a shechita at all. But the one that says that it's not a biblical law, amai pachi rabbanan. So why did the sages that argued on Reb Meir, why did they say that he's exempt from paying the 4 or 5 times? My answer is a shaira. It was only on the other cases that he's exempt from the 4 or 5 times. That was an easy answer if we were ready to accept that. We didn't have to go through this whole thing. The Gemara started off with Bishlayma Aveda Zara and Shara Niskal. I understand that it's not an acceptable slaughtering because you can't eat it. But Shabbos, what are you going to do? So we went through half a page of Gemara telling me that Shabbos is still not acceptable. Now we said, but according to the opinion that says Shabbos is acceptable, what are you going to do? I said, okay, we're not talking about Shabbos. Okay. Rav Meir Amay Mechayev. According to Rav Meir, why does he have to pay 4 or 5 times? Sheichet la'avodah zara. If he shechts for avodah zara, keeping the shachet bapor to aser. As soon as he starts to cut at the slaughtering, starts to do the first incision, so the animal already becomes prohibited because the act, it was already being considered a sacrifice to avodah zara, which means that you can't have any benefit from it. Idach, as he finishes the slaughtering, isurei hana, it becomes prohibited to have any benefit. He's not slaughtering his own animal anymore. See, ownership means that you have the rights to enjoy it in one way or another. But here, because he can't have any enjoyment from it, so it's not considered like he owns it. So if he's not really slaughtering the animal that belonged to the original owner. Remember we said, like according to Rav, that says Yish Kaina, that if he acquires it before he slaughters it, then he's slaughtering his own animal. It doesn't have to pay 4 or 5 times. He just has the debt that he has to give back. So over here, he slaughtered it. Becomes prohibited to have benefit. He stole it. Becomes prohibited to have benefit from it because he started to do the slaughtering. And then he's finished his slaughtering it. So now you would think he should have to pay 4 or 5 times. The Gemara is suggesting he shouldn't have to pay 4 or 5 times because it's not the original owners anymore. No one can have benefit from it. Amar Rava.
Is there such thing like that if they intend that this animal is going to be for idol worship, that it's like forbidden automatically the same way that
No, only after an action's done, not with a thought. With action. What's the action?
Well,
The beginning to slaughter it.
But to consecrate it like, for the basic makdash, it works like that if you like, intend to use it as a korban, that's it. If you don't,
Right.
You're not allowed to have benefit.
Right. That's specifically thought. Specifically works for the temple, not for That's a good point.
So in that case, he still has to pay double. Just doesn't have to pay for it.
Right, you'd have to pay double. That's what we're suggesting, and which is problematic for the Mishnah that we quoted, the Brisa that we quoted. Amar Rava says, Ba'imer, we're talking about over here, it's called an ukimta, where we create a scenario to make it fit with the halacha. We have a halacha that really doesn't fit in all cases, but we adjust the scenario to make it like it's talking about when is such and such a scenario.
What was the term you used?
Ukimta.
Ukimta.
Ukimta means it's a scenario.
When the guy gets caught, instead of paying 4 or 5 times, he's like, "Oh, it was for an idol, so he just pays twice." He can use
Right.
that to get out.
Right.
So when it comes to being subjected to the greater punishment, you still have to pay. You don't necessarily have to pay double, right? Just like high visa or something like that. You don't pay the lesser punishment. Even if you didn't,
If the actual stealing involved a greater punishment, like cases we had before, he stole it on Shabbos in a way that it was a violation of Shabbos, then he wouldn't have to pay even the double. Wouldn't have to pay even the first part. Here we're talking about that the violation was just the slaughtering of it.
But it says here that he was going to slaughter for like the
Right.
Just didn't go through it.
Well, when he's going to slaughter for avodah zara, as he starts to slaughter it, it
Yeah.
becomes a
He takes a
it
kinyan
becomes prohibited, and
Yeah.
then once it's prohibited, then it doesn't belong to the owner. And then when he finishes the slaughtering, when he should have to pay the 4 or 5 times, so we're saying that
that falls off.
that it falls off, right? So Rava says, Ba'imer, the person saying the Gemar Svicha Hu Oivda. He says, I'm worshiping an idol with the slaughtering, but I'm not doing the worshiping is not at the beginning of the slaughtering. It's only the very last movement, slice of the that's where the worshiping is going to happen. So therefore, it doesn't become prohibited at the beginning. It only becomes prohibited at the end, exactly at the time when it's considered a slaughtering that it should have to pay 4 or 5 times. So it never became prohibited beforehand. Yeah. So that's a machlekes now, Reb Meir and the Rabbanan, if he has to pay 4 or 5 times. Right? Reb Meir said that Shchita, Reb Meir holds that it's that he has to pay. What were the cases? Yeah. Gonna v'tavach b'Shabbos, gonna v'tavach l'avodah zarah, gonna v'shal shor niskal v'tvachim, shal matash l'mi, mishalim abba v'chamish Reb Meir. Reb Meir says yes. Omar, okay. Now the Gemara asks the same question on the shor niskal. Shor niskal, Yisur Hananin, olav the marikatava. How is he slaughtering a shor niskal, an ox that's supposed to be stoned because it had killed a man? He shouldn't have to pay anything for that. Because it shouldn't belong to the owner, because ownership means that you can have benefit from it, and here the owner can't have benefit from it, so he's just slaughtering an ox that's not considered it's considered ownerless. It wasn't his. Rava has another ukimta over here. It says we're talking about a case where how to become a shor niskal. It was given, this ox that had an original owner, and the original owner gives it to a watchman to watch. It damages by the shaymer. V'huad b'bei shaymer, became a muad over there. Why does it need to be a muad? I'm not sure. V'nigmar dina b'bei shaymer, and the verdict was done by the shaymer. Reb Meir savala karab Yaakov, v'savar karab Shimon. Now, it goes on. Reb Meir, we combine a few opinions here to make this into, you see, we're talking about now that if it's Asr Ba'ana, so why is there any value to this? If he steals an ox that has no value. So what we're doing is Rav is suggesting that this is following the view of Rabbi Yaakov. Now, Rabbi Yaakov holds that if someone had borrowed an ox, and it becomes a watchman for an ox, it becomes a shor niskal because it had killed.
Intentionally or not intentionally?
The ox intentionally killed.
And it wasn't on Yom Kippur.
Right, the ox.
None of it.
Yeah, we don't know if it was on Yom Kippur. And the watchman who now owes the original owner for the ox can actually take the ox and say, here's your ox, and just return it. But he doesn't have to pay for an ox because the ox is still alive. Now it's only alive for like a day or two because the court is going to show up and take it to the wherever they kill it. Not in the pound, but they pound it. Anyway, so what happens now is that since the owner could have returned the ox, since the watchman could have returned the ox, that means that to the watchman this ox has value because it's exempting him from making a full payment. And we're also going to follow the view of Reb Shimon that something that doesn't have intrinsic value but causes value. It causes a certain value. That's actually considered a value. So it goes like this. He holds like Rabbi Yaakov and like Reb Shimon. Even after the court case, if the watchman decides to return the ox to the original owner, it's considered returned and he doesn't owe him anything. He holds like Reb Shimon that says that anything that causes a value, causes money, is considered money. And so therefore, when now this Ganav came along and stole it, so he actually took away something of value that from the shaymer. It causes a value. So who's he going to have to pay? I guess he's going to have to pay to the shaymer. The Tanan, where do we know that something that causes value is considered value? The Tanan, Reb Shimon Aimer, Kachim Shechai Bachris and Chayev. This is talking about someone that steals a sacrifice. And if it's the type of sacrifice that was a nedava, someone said, Harezu, this animal is a sacrifice, is an oila, which would mean that if that animal, I'm sorry, not Harezu, he says Hare alai, it's a neder. He says, I'm accepting on myself to bring an oila, and he designates this animal. That means that if this animal gets lost, he has to replace it with another animal. So when the Ganav comes in and steals this animal, even though you could say maybe that it's not considered that he stole it, or whatever the case is, but the fact is that the original owner needs to replace it. So he caused the damage, so he's going to have to pay kefil for that, for stealing that animal. Double. He's going to have to pay double.
So the value becomes double, real value.
Yeah, but it's considered value because it causes value. Since he's going to have to replace it, even though it itself to him is not really, it's not really owned by him or something because it's been designated. But nevertheless, because he's going to have to replace it, it's considered like it's his. So Alma Davar Gaim Lamam Kamma Dami. Amar Rav Kana. Rav Kana says, I said over this halacha to Rab Zvid. He says, "Mi matzes mukmes masnisin karab meir v'lei karab Shimon." The way you're saying it, we go back to this original discussion over here. Our Mishnah says that if someone slaughtered and someone stole an animal and slaughtered on Yom Kippur, we said that he has to pay 4 or 5 times. Why does he have to pay 4 or 5 times? There should be lashes, and lashes should exempt him from the 4 or 5 times. So we said no. We're following the opinion of Reb Meir that says that you have lashes. He says, how could you do that? But you want to say that it's not like the other opinions, not like Reb Shimon. At the end of the Mishnah, it says that Reb Shimon exempts 2 other cases. It was slaughtered in the Azara, or if it was a treifa. Shimon says that's exempt. Shimon says that's exempt. That means that Reb Shimon holds all the other ones are going to be chayiv.
We can make the case that paying 4 or 5 times is a worse punishment.
Lashes. They don't think so. They think that lashes is worse. That's the assumption. Look, he's a ganav. He can steal another 4 or 5 times the money.
We're serious. One dash over the person.
Yeah, usually people pay money not to go through any suffering like that. No, kefil means double. Kefir means that is the payment that when an ox gores and kills a person, if it was a muad ox, he has to pay the value of the person or his own value.
They had them.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry.
The case of the animal that's gonna get stoned, that meat, like they give it to the dogs. What happens with it?
That meat has value. So it should either go. It could. Guy paid for it already. He keeps it. You're talking about he slaughtered on Shabbos or slaughtered on Kippur?
The animal that gets stoned for maybe because he killed someone.
Oh, so that's asr bana. That you can't have benefit from.
Not even to the dogs.
No. Yeah, feeding dogs is benefit.
So comments, right?
Yeah, there's a comment. You can't feed it to stray dogs.
What would they do? They would bury it? Or...
It's either buried or burnt. Yeah. Check out. There's 2 options with the Isuri Hana. What is it?
It's like you get benefit, you get enough to eat.
Yeah, and that's the discussion actually.
Oh.
Can you cook food over the things that you're this, or what about the ashes? Anything that's supposed to be burnt. You're allowed to, right. Basar v'chalav is burnt, I think. Arla, I think, I forget, some are burnt, some are buried. But the rule is that anything that's burnt, you're allowed to get benefit from the ashes. Anything that's buried, you can't get, that they're supposed to be buried, you can't get benefit from the ashes if you burnt it. Right? If the rule is that it's supposed to be buried, I'm talking about the rule. The rule is that it's supposed to be buried, then you can't have any benefit from the ashes if it was burnt. If you want to put the ashes in your compost,
Yeah.
you can't. You can't use it for your fertilizer or whatever. So he says like this. So this is Reb Zvid responds, Loi, that's not the pshat. Michlal the Maide Betavach L'Rafua L'Klavim. Reb Shimon only agreed to the last cases of the Mishnah, but he argued on the last 2 cases. But that doesn't mean he agrees to the entire Mishnah. That's how we answer this. Okay. Ganav Mishalava V'Tavach Machar. Someone stole from his father, and he slaughtered it, or he sold it. He has to pay 4 or 5 times. Now, there was a distinction here between he stole from his father, he stole an animal from his father, and he slaughtered it and sold it. Then the father died. So he owes the money to his brothers, but really he originally owed it to the father.
Right.
Because the father died, he owes it to the brothers. So he has to pay the brothers. And he himself is an inheritor as well, so he'll have to pay them their portion. Right? He ends up inheriting some of that 4 or 5 times, but he'll have to pay their portion. Now, if it was stolen from the father and then the father died and then he slaughtered it, that may be a difference. That may be different, as we'll see in a moment. Rav Amir of Nachman, Rav asked Rav Nachman the following question. Let's say someone stole an ox that belonged to 2 partners. And he slaughters it. And he admits to one of them, he says, Mister, I stole and slaughtered your ox. Well, the fact that he admitted actually exempts him from paying the 4 or 5 times. Now, to him, he would only have to pay 2 or 2.5 times because of partners. So he just exempted himself from 2 or 2.5 times, but he still owes to the other partner because witnesses are going to show up. This following the view that holds that someone that admits and witnesses show up later. He's exempt.
For the 4 or 5 times, those proceeds are just divided in half to each partner.
Yeah, you would have to pay half of it to each. Well, what happens now is, Rabba's question is, Chamisha Bakar Amar Rachmana, the Eibishter says you have to pay 5 cattle, Chamisha Chatzai Bakar, not 5 half cattle. If you have to pay 5 whole ones, then good. But 5 half ones, who came up with that one? That's not in the Torah. Maybe not. Maybe even 5 half cattle. Maybe that's also the type of payment that we should have to pay in this case. Amalei, Rav Nachman says, it says 5 cattle. Oh, it's only 5 cattle. He doesn't have to pay the other partner. Isvei, Rav has a question. Someone steals from his father and he slaughters it or sells it, and then his father dies, he has to pay 4 or 5 times. 1 second. Problem is the father died. That's as if he admitted. Why? Because he gets to keep part of it. Because he's an inheritor just like his brothers. So when he pays, he doesn't pay the full 4 or 5 times. He only pays partially because whatever his part is. So Katani, and nevertheless it says he has to pay 4 or 5 times. We know it's not really 4 or 5 times, it's 1 minus his portion. According to Rav Nachman, you should know it. We're talking about over here that the father was already in court over this theft, and so therefore he owes it to the estate, which is a full amount. Then when he inherits it, it's not like he's not paying it. It's going into the estate, and then he'll get whatever portion from the estate. But the debt that he has of the 4 or 5 times already exists before it's payment time. But let's say he didn't go to court. The father never went to court. They went to court afterwards, after he died, and now he really just owes it to the brothers, and he doesn't really owe it to the. It wasn't already considered a full payment or like a set payment when the father was alive. So now he's really only going to have to pay 3 or 4 times or whatever, however many brothers he has. So then he probably doesn't have to pay. If that's the case, so why when it goes on in the Seifa it says, let's say he stole from his father and the father died, and then he sold it, then he slaughtered it. He doesn't have to pay 4 or 5 times. So we have a contrast. If he stole it if he stole and slaughtered it while the father was alive, he does have to pay. He stole it till the father died, and then he sold it and slaughtered it, then he doesn't have to pay. But 1 second. Let the contrast not be where the father died before it was sold or slaughtered. Let the contrast be where he stole it, sold it, or slaughtered it, and then the father died. And the contrast will be, was the father in court over this or not? If the father was in court, yes. Then if that contrast exists, so why when the Bryce is going to make a contrast, does it make this extreme contrast? In itself, you could have the same halacha. When does he have to pay 4 or 5 times? That's only if the father was in court. But if he died before he went to court, he shouldn't have to pay. Amalei, so Rav Nachman responds, Hachinami, I did the Nasav Reisha, Gana Mishalav, Tavach Machar, Rach Mesav, Nasav Seifa, Gana Nami, Gana Mishalav, Mesav, Tavach Machar. It was just to make it symmetrical with the first case, and that's why it didn't add in Ahmad Badin in that thing. It just gave it the very general. It's just a weak answer. The Gemara usually doesn't do that.
If his father passed away before he slaughtered it, then you sort of go back to him.
Right.
I don't know how many siblings he had.
Right. According to Reb Nachman, if the father passed away before he slaughtered it, then he would not have to pay at all, because it's only 4 or 5 times complete. This would not be 4 or 5 times complete.
It might even be his own animal.
Right. But even if it's not, even if it's, this is it was the father's animal and the money needs to be divided. But nevertheless, he doesn't have to pay the full 4 or 5 times. He should be exempt because Reb Nachman said it has to be full. Sorry? But he stole it while the father was alive. He slaughtered it while the father was alive.
After the father passed, the animal was also owned by his brothers.
By him and his brothers, right?
It will still be stealing.
He has to give them their portion. But according to Rav Nachman, there's no 4 or 5 times in that case, because you're not going to give the full 4 or 5 times. It's only if it's complete. And because he's going to be taking part of it, it's not complete. So the Gemara now says, Latzafra, in the morning, Amar Lei, Rav Nachman came to Rava, he said, Chamisha Bakar, Amar Rachman Afila Chamisha Chatzoi Bakar. Changed his mind. In the morning, Rav Nachman changed his mind. He says, you even have to pay if it's not 4 or 5 times complete. This that I didn't tell this to you in last night in the evening, because I didn't eat my steak, and I wasn't able to think properly. Couldn't think without the steak. Yeah.
Wasn't that ox?
There may be some sort of pun on this. I didn't look at the commentaries, but it wasn't that ox. There may be some sort of pun on this where he's talking about the animal that maybe I didn't eat the animal, maybe means I didn't look into it. What number here?
First figure of speech.
1. Not properly examine the matter. Meat in Talmudic allegory is a Talmudic allegory for the proper understanding of Torah law. Thus, Rav Nachman said he did not eat the meat of an ox. He meant to say, did not properly understand the Torah's intent of the verse. Taisvus, who understands Rav Nachman, meant literally to say that he had fasted on the previous day and therefore failed to comprehend the issue properly. Yeah, that's Taisvus. Shari B'Tainus, Taisvus says. I told you one time I went to one of Elchanan's wine dinners. He makes these things. Over there, they serve you meat and wine. Anyway, I tried it in the morning. I woke up trying to learn the Gemara to prepare. I couldn't think. Anyway, so I gave the share, whatever. Anyway, I came home. I told my daughter, this morning I was trying to learn. I couldn't think. Anyway, she had heard this quote because Tanya quotes it. She knew this. She says, oh, that's because you didn't have meat and wine. I said, no, it's because I did.
Why does it quote it?
It's talking over there about using it for positive.
Oh, excessive.
Yeah. Well, it could be excessive, but it also could be to elevate it. Okay. Well, a maishna reishna, maishna seifa. If that's the case, then what's the difference? Why in the seifa, if it was the father dies before it gets sold or slaughtered, why doesn't he have to pay the 4 or 5 times? So maybe you should just pay them there if you can give half of the 4 or 5 times, right? So then he should just pay that to his brothers in the safe as well. So the Gemara says, "Reisha krin beyitvachai kulei beisura, seifalei krin beyitvachai kulei beisura." Jonathan was maybe alluding to this before. When he slaughters it in the after the father dies, so because he's partial owner, so it's not considered like he slaughtered 100% stolen item. It would have to be, when does he have to pay the 4 or 5 times? That's only if it's totally not his. But because he's now a partial owner of it, so it's not considered tvachai that he's tvachai means he slaughtered it. But we're talking about it's only if he slaughtered it when it's entirely prohibited. Not over here, it's partially permissible, depending on how many brothers has, half permissible or whatever, and that's why he's not going to have to pay. Okay. Hulu. I remember when I was learning this Gemara this morning. So I remember this was a lot of times I mentioned that when it says v'chulu in the quote from the Mishnah, it's very important to look it up. What does the Mishnah actually say there? Because sometimes the entire Gemara is not on the quote that it gave; it's on the etc. What's included in the etc. So I said that I was learning a Gemara. I was a Bachar in Yeshiva. It took me like an hour to figure out what the Gemara. I read it again and again and again. I couldn't figure it out. Then I realized that I have to go back to the Mishnah to look up what's the chulu. I think it was this Gemara that I got stuck on, because the Gemara doesn't make sense at all if you just read what got quoted. Sheikh names is Treifa. Okay, chulu. What does it say in that etc.? In etc. it says that if someone slaughters an ox in the azara, then he has to pay 4 or 5 times. Or a treifa also has to pay 4 or 5 times, even if it turns out that it's a treifa. Reb Shimon argued, right? No, Reb Shimon argued on the treifa and the azara. Reb Shimon argued on these two, but the sages said no. They just said he has to pay. Okay.
Is it because he wouldn't know before the slaughtering that it's
Let's take a look at the Gemara. Let's see.
Does the Ram put etc. if it lists like a lot of unrelated specifics?
Usually not. They won't put it in. It's only if they'll put in the chulu if it's supposed to be there. Otherwise, the Mishnah is always continuing. The Mishnah always has more to say unless you're at the last line of the Mishnah, and it doesn't say chulu. Last case. There it does actually. Gonna mishalav v'tavach machar chulu, but it wants to tell me that he has to pay. The last case. Yeah, a lot of these have the chulu. Amalei Rav Chavivi michuznal or Rav Ashi shma minayin le'ein l'shchita l'b'seif. When it comes to shecht and chulin in the azara, so it becomes prohibited. An animal that's slaughtered in the azara becomes prohibited to have benefit from if it's chulin. A mundane, it's not a sacrifice. You're not allowed to slaughter a mundane animal in the azara, chulin b'azara. And if you do, yeah, just the shech, just for eating. If you do, it becomes prohibited. Now, Rav Chaviv Michuzna says, when does it become prohibited? It only becomes prohibited at the end of the shechita, not at the beginning. Talking about this, the second difference here. Not really. An animal is if it's an avela, a sheretz is a different story. Sheretz. No, and this is an animal that's not even an avela, it's shechted. And a shechted animal isn't an avela. It doesn't give up impurity. It's regular meat. Well, let's see. 1 second. If you say that there's a concept of shechita at the beginning, even the shachet b'porta, once he slaughters it a little bit, asra becomes prohibited. Idach, the rest of it, like the marika tavach, it doesn't belong to the original owner. Like the questions we asked before, like slaughtering on Shabbos, or I'm sorry, slaughtering for Rabbi Dezara, or slaughtering for the Shar Niskal, it shouldn't belong to him. Amalei Rav Huna Brei Rava Kika Mechayev Ahu Porta. So he's saying that he's going to be chayiv on the first part of it as well. You see, what we were doing now is we're saying that there's two parts to the shechita, the beginning and the end. When it comes to shechting in the Avodah Zarah, I'm sorry, shechting in the Azara, not Avodah Zarah, shechting in the Azara.
It's not Avodah Zarah.
Not Avodah
It's
Zarah.
just in the Zarah.
A mundane animal in the Azara. So that's going to take place at the end of the shechita. Because if it would take place at the beginning of the shechita, then the four or five time payment takes place at the end of the shechita, and shechting in the Azara took place at the beginning of the shechita. So then it's already prohibited before he has to pay the 4 or 5 times before he does that action. So Rav Huna says no, they're both happening at the same time at the beginning. When he starts to slaughter, he has to pay 4 or 5 times, and when he has to do the payment, it's at the beginning. When it becomes aser because it's in Azara, it's at the beginning. Amalei Ravashi like titchu. Don't say like that. Utvacha, he has to slaughter it. Kula bein and baleka. He didn't slaughter it entirely. Utvacha means that he has to do the full slaughtering. Can't say that you have to pay the 4 or 5 times already at the beginning of the slaughtering. Elakasha. Okay, so now you have a question. So when is the actual shechita when it comes to becoming prohibited in Azara? Amalei Hachim Rav Gamda Mishmei Rav. Rav Gamda says the name of Rav Ken Shachan Mikta Simanim B'Bachutz B'Gamram B'Fnim. Talking about that this guy probably holding the animal in his hands. Wow. Hanukkah. There's donuts here.
Yeah.
What took it so
I ain't trying, baby.
He was cooking the.
As long as you guys are eating donuts.
Oh, he wants in.
Naphtali, see what you missed.
I know, I'm jealous.
Let me show my father. Yitzi brought in this thing that says, move to Providence. You can get $50,000.
Woo!
Oh, wow.
Contribution and free year tuition. Free housing contribution.
Woo!
Yeah,
You have to be Jewish?
probably.
Why?
Okay.
Goes up for grabs, or
Do you
they
want,
just
can I
deliver?
show them the donuts? Yeah.
Get some extras.
Let me show them the donuts.
Oh, vicarious hana.
Before they're gone.
What does
This
porsa
time's gonna
mean?
happen. Sorry?
Porsa, what does that word mean?
What word?
Porsa. Heva resh taf aleph.
Oh, Puerto means a little bit. Poquito.
Okay, thank you.
Right here, they don't hold the idea of remember when something is falling, it would be considered. Like when you do the first decision, it's like dead animal.
Not really. Not really. Not really. The shechita is a process. Question is the shechita at the end of the process, or is it the whole process? So we were saying that it's at the end of the if it's at the end of the process, then it would make sense. But if we say the shechita is the whole process, then it's really becoming prohibited at the beginning. You shouldn't have to make the payments because it was already prohibited by the time that it's okay. So he has this example like this. This is another Ukimta. It says, how's the case? Kagoin, for example, he's holding the animal, he's outside the temple, and he starts to slaughter it. And as he's slaughtering it, he's entering the temple. So at the very end of the slaughtering, he's inside the temple. So it only becomes prohibited at the end when he's entering. And that's exactly the same time that he has to pay the 4 or 5 times, because at the end is when he would incur that punishment. That penalty.
Thought the shechita is like a split second.
Yeah, but in that split second, you have to divide it up. In that, you slow
Split
down.
of a split.
You slow down the camera. Slow motion. Some say this comment of Rab Gamdam in the name of Rava on the following statement. It goes like this. Rab Shimon Mishum de Rab Levi Saba. Rab Shimon says in the name of Rab Levi Saba, Rab Levi the elder, I guess. Shechita takes place at the end. There's a process that leads up to it, but it's the last moment that's the real shechita. He's talking about if a Kohen or whoever's doing the slaughtering has the wrong thoughts during the slaughtering. So at which point of the slaughtering is it really considered the slaughtering? He says, oh, it's only the very, very end. The middle is just a lead up to that. It's in the beginning. That's not the real slaughtering. The real slaughtering is the last moment. However, Rabbi Yochanan says, that it's oh, by the way, Reb Shimon is supposed to be Reb Shimon ben Lakish. That's that makes sense. So it's a machlekes Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, that's on the side. I have the comment corrected. It's a correction by Rabbi Yeshaya Pick, Yeshaya Berlin. He added that in on the side. So Rabbi Yochanan Yeshon l'shchita mitchila vad seif. Rabbi Yochanan says no. The whole time is considered the shchita, and thoughts that would make the sacrifice non-kosher. That's applicable for the entire process of the shchita. According to Rabbi Yochanan, maybe we should say that chulin, mundane animals that are slaughtered in the temple, are not deraisa, because if they are, we're going to have trouble with our Mishnah. Because if you say that it is deraisa, when he starts to slaughter it, it's already prohibited. The rest of it, when he's slaughtering it, it doesn't belong to the original owner. So why should he have to pay 4 or 5 times? Kashan our Mishnah. Rav says no, he's chayiv because of that original slaughtering as well. That's when he has to pay 4 or 5 times. Don't push it into that answer. It has to be entirely slaughtered to pay the 4 or 5 times. Elakasha. So then we're stuck. How do you explain the Mishnah? According to Rabbi Yochanan, we'll have to say that he was slaughtering most of it outside, and only at the end did he enter inside, and he slaughtered the rest inside. Okay. How the donuts? Good. Hanukkah.
I appreciate it.
Someone here regrets eating it. Only afterwards, beforehand. Okay.
Well, it says every night.
I still made an hour.
Oh, that's right. Yes, he says you have to keep adding to the Hanukkah lights every night. Keep adding, you never stop. So he's adding to the donuts.
Would you add?
First night you have 1 donut. Second night you have 2. Okay, the Mishnah says like this. Ganav al pishnayim. We're on the Mishnah on 72b. Ganav al pishnayim. Someone steals the ox, and yet there's 2 witnesses there that testify that he stole it. Tavachamach al piyam. And then they happen to be there as well. They're following this guy around. They happen to be there when he slaughters it as well. Maybe they're the tenants or something. And it turns out, after they testified in court that this guy, Shmerel, is a ganav, and he also slaughtered it, it turns out that these 2 guys, Reuven and Shimon, that were the witnesses, what happens is, Levi and Yehuda come and say, Reuven and Shimon, you weren't even in town on that day that you claim that this took place. You were with us somewhere else. It turns out that it's called Zaymamin, when 2 other witnesses say that you were with us. So then what the rule is that they have to pay what Shmerel what they wanted Shmerel to pay. So now Reuven and Shimon have to pay what they want. Nimtzu Zaymamin. Mishalman Akal, they have to pay 4 or 5 times, because Reuven and Shimon were testifying to the full 4 or 5 time payment. Let's say 2 witnesses testified that Shmerel stole, and another 2 witnesses testified, not the same guys. This is God and Usher. They testified that he slaughtered it or sold it. And both groups of Reuven and Shimon and Gad and Asher, both of those groups ended up becoming Zaymimin. Why? Because Levi and Yehuda said, Reuven, Shimon, Gad and Asher, you were with us. You weren't even there. So Harishayim Mishalman Tashlumi Kefal. The first witnesses, Reuven and Shimon, they were testified about the stealing. They wanted Shmuel to pay double. They have to pay double. Achrayim, Gad and Asher, that were testifying about that he sold it, the extra 3 times. Mishalman Tashlumi Gimel. They have to pay 3 times, which makes a total of 5 times. Where do they have to pay it to? To Shmuel. Right?
The shechting, the animal changes.
Right. Yeah. But when at the process of the shechting, it's considered belonging to the original owner, and he stole and slaughtered something that belonged to the original owner. Right? What's the problem? Why?
Because he says, hence, when he slaughters the rest, it is not the animal of the original owner that he just slaughtered.
That's in the Gemara before you're asking. Yeah, that was if he slaughters it in the courtyard of the temple, because it becomes prohibited. A benefit from it. When does it become prohibited? At the beginning of the slaughtering. When does he have to pay the 4 or 5 times slaughtering? That slaughtering is at the end of the slaughtering. So when he ends up slaughtering the animal, it wasn't really the original owner's animal.
Probably his office hours actually.
Okay. Nimtzu achreinim zaymin. Let's say not the first ones became zaymin, but the last ones became zaymin. So who mishalim tashlumi kefil? The Ganav, we know that he actually stole, right? 2 witnesses testified that Reuben and Shimon said that Shmuel stole, so Shmuel has to pay double. Gad and Asher testified that Shmuel sold it or slaughtered it, and turns out that Gad and Asher were really with Levi and Yehuda at the time when they're saying that on Tuesday, whatever. So Vehain, so Levi and Yehuda have to pay Mishal Tashlumi Gimel. They have to pay the 3 times because that's what they wanted to impose on. Turns out half of the double payment comes from the Ganav himself, and the extra 3 times for the slaughtering that comes from the witnesses that became Zaymim, and that's what they wanted the Ganav. Echad min achreinim Zaymim. If one of the second becomes Zaymim, that means God was not really there. God was somewhere else. So God and Asher are testifying that he sold it or slaughtered it. Turns out that the Levi and Yehuda say God wasn't there. He was with us somewhere else. So then Batla Koleidas. Batla Deshnia. The second testimony is invalid because you lost one of your witnesses. Let's say Ruvain became Zaymimin, not Shimon. So Batla Koleidas. Then the whole thing is nullified, because if it wasn't stolen, because these witnesses that claim that it's stolen were found out to be false, so then what's the problem that he slaughtered it? If it wasn't stolen, then there's no problem for him to slaughter his own animal. The second testimony is also invalid. There's no second testimony if the first testimony is nothing. Oh wow. I'll tell you, look at that, nachas. That looks like when you buy a picture frame, it comes with a picture already in there, like the
I'm in New York.
Oh wow. Oh, I didn't realize.
This is the New York branch.
Dirty Warriors.
I have it. Here.
Oh, it's just the scene at the moment.
No, I don't know how to share it. That's this kid, grandchildren. Very nice.
We're about 20 minutes from the oil.
Oh wow.
So you guys are eating donuts. I'm going to be at the oil eating those cookies.
Oh yeah. Okay. Oil cookies.
That's much better.
Okay. So But the shemen gneva ain't tvicha mechira, because if there's no robbery, if there's not robbery, if there's no theft, then there's no slaughtering and selling it. Okay. We start now a very famous Gemara, because it's one of the 6 machlekasin between Abaya and Rava, that the halacha is like Abaya. Remember Yesh Lemidas? Remember that? Shalom Yesh Lemidas? What are the 6? Machlekasin that we paskin like Abaya, not like Rava.
Found it in a soul, I know.
No. There's what happens is that usually we always paskin like Rava. There's 6 graces. What do you know what the 6 are? Okay, it's an acronym. There's an acronym for it.
Yeah.
It's called Yal Kagam.
Let me find it.
It's an acronym. Yal Kagam. All right. So one of them is okay. Well, this is the one in Baba Kamma. This is Eid Zaymim. Yud is Yesh Lamidas. This one in Kedushin, exactly.
6 cases where we follow Rava or Abaya.
6 cases where we follow Abaya. Itmar, we have a statement. Eid Zaymim. When it comes to a witness that was proven to be a Zaymim because other witnesses said that you were together with us. Abaya says, Abaya Amar Lemafreyu Nifsal, to follow this. Abaya says that you see, what happened is he testified once. And then a month later, 2 witnesses show up and say that how could you have said what you testified? You weren't even there to have witnessed it. You were really with us. So now he becomes a puzzle witness. But what about in between when he testified and when the 2 witnesses come? He possibly signed documents and all of that. Is he considered invalid all throughout that interim? Do we go back to the time that he testified, or do we say that now that the 2 witnesses come up and say you were with us, from now on he's puzzled, but not like back to that?
A Brera question.
Similar to the Brera, yeah. Abaya says that it goes backwards and retroactive. He's an invalid witness all that time, which is totally logical because that's when he lied. Rava says no, he's only invalid from when we know that he's invalid, which is from now.
Should have had the Cheskes Kashrus.
Until everything that he did until then is all good. Abaya says you go backwards, retroactive Mahushai to Das to the Habali Russia. From the time that he testified, he becomes a wicked person because he lied. Says you can't use a wicked person as a witness. Rava says that it's only from here and on. Why? The fact that an Eid Zaymim, someone that wanted to do something, and it turns out that he wasn't really there, the fact that he's puzzled, that's a big chiddush. Why should he be puzzled? The Hatreyu training it's 2 against 2. We have 2 witnesses here that say that what happened. This guy stole, this guy, whatever. Then we have another 2 witnesses that say, how could you 2 be there? You 2 were with us. So it's 2 against 2. And the halach is we follow the second 2. Why? Why do you follow the second 2? His word against his word, or their word against their word. Why do you do that? Well, that's a chiddush that the Torah says. Therefore, because it's a chiddush, it's something that's not 100% logical. So therefore, we only know from the time of the second witnesses coming that say that he's invalid. Only from then and onwards. That's Rava's logic. Ikadami, that those that say slightly different. Rava Namik Abaya Sfirle, really Rava holds like Abaya. That really it's retroactive. He's a liar from back then, and therefore he's invalid. But in the time of the Rava, what's the reason that Rava says not to do that? Is Mishum Pseida de Lakuches, because it's very possible that there were documents that were signed that people that have purchased things are now all the documents that they have that attest to those transactions are all going to be invalid. My Benaya, what's the difference between the 2 versions of Rava? Let's say it's not a 2 against 2. Remember, we said that the witnesses here were Reuven and Shimon. We said that the 2 other witnesses that said that you were with us is Levi and Yehuda. So Reuben and Shimon testified that this guy stole. Levi and Yehuda show up and say that how Reuben and Shimon could you testify that that Shmerel stole? Levi and Yehuda say, Reuben and Shimon, you were with us at that time. You weren't even around in the same place as Shmerel. Okay. Now, that's a chiddush that we listen to Levi and Yehuda. But let's say that Levi and Yehuda testify that Reuven was with us, and Yisachar Zevulun testified that Shimon was with us. So it's 2-1. So then there's no chiddush. So according to that, if there's no chiddush, the fact that we follow the second witnesses, so then Rava would agree that you should go back to the time that that the person lied. When do we say it's only from here and on because of the chiddush? But if it's 2-1, what's the chiddush? Because it was 2-2. Why should we listen to these? Listen to those. But if it's 2-1, then we should go backwards. Inami, another shot, another possible difference. Not that they said you were with us, but they said that we know that you witnesses actually stole. And so therefore, it's not 2 against 2. They're not saying that we were here and you're saying no, we weren't. They're saying one testimony. 2 other witnesses just come in to testify about their character, which they were not testifying about their character. It's not 2 against 2. It's only 2 against no one. It's he's saying that you're a thief. Okay, whatever. Testify that he's a thief. That means he's puzzled. Okay. According to the one that says it's a chiddush, so over here we're not going to say that it's a chiddush because it's not 2 against 2 anymore. But if you're concerned about people not knowing that they were invalid and they were signing documents, so then that's still going to be an issue. Rav Yirmiyah Avid Rav Papa of the Kavsei de Rava. Rav Yirmiyah said that Rav Papa paskin like Rava. Rav Papa is a student of Rava. He's also of Abaya. Rav Ashi Amar Hilchas Kavsei de Abaya. Rav Ashi says Allah is like Abaya. And the Hilchas Kavasei Abaya Bial Kagam, and the Gemara concludes, Allah is like Abaya by these 6 cases. Yal Kagam. Yud is Yer Shlamidas, the Ayin is Eid Zaimim, the second one. This Gemara right here. I'm gonna have some questions now on Rava or Abaya. I'm just gonna go through this. Tanan, start in the Mishnah. You ready?
No.
Get ready.
Here it comes, baby.
Get steady.
It's steady.
No. Oh, there it is. Steady.
Tanan, start in the Mishnah. Ganav al Pishnayim. Someone stole, and there's 2 witnesses that testify that he stole. And he also slaughtered it, and or sold it by the same 2 witnesses. This is what we're talking about. Shmerel stole, slaughtered, or sold, and Reuben and Shimon testified to that. Nimtzu Zaimim. But the problem is that Levi and Yehuda show up and say, Reuben and Shimon, you weren't even there. You were with us somewhere else. Reuben and Shimon have to pay 4 or 5 times to Shmerel because that's what they intended to do. My love, is it not? First, they testified that he stole. And then they testified that he slaughtered. They became Zaimimim. How could you testify that on Monday he stole? On Monday you were with us. How could you testify that on Tuesday he slaughtered it? On Tuesday you were with us. And if we say that's whenever they become Zaimimim, they get Zaimimim from back to retroactive to the Monday, right? It turns out that their testimony about the slaughtering, they were already puzzled.
Right.
If you go retroactive, because it turns out that when they testified about the stealing, they were liars. So now the second testimony means that they weren't even valid witnesses at all. Why do they have to pay 3 times? They were puzzled even before they showed up. It's not even considered a testimony.
No.
Amri, so they said like this: we have to create a case. What came out was that they were invalidated from the Tuesday. God and Asher showed up and said that Reuben and Shimon on Tuesday you were with us. How could you testify that you were there when he slaughtered it? You weren't even in town. And okay, if that's the case, then at the time that he was still kosher they were still kosher at the time of the stealing. So there was valid testimony about the stealing, and there was a valid testimony about the slaughtering up until they became zayim. Amri saif saif ki haji mitzmi agneva gloi milsa d'chi asadu atvicha psulin havi amay mishal atvicha. 1 second. 1 second. I get it. That first they became zayim from the Tuesday, but a day later the witnesses showed up and made them zayim from the Monday, which means that really, in truth, at the time that they testified about the on Tuesday about the slaughtering, they were really invalid. In truth, they're really invalid. I get it that it didn't happen yet, but in truth, they're really valid. If you go back to Monday, then it turns out that on Tuesday they were invalid. The Hilchasa shot must be it had to be that they gave both testimonies together. The word over here, v'hilchasa, means that like the proper explanation is, not the halacha is, but I don't know how they translate it. What do they say over there? What is it?
I'll give you his final answer.
And the halacha is in accordance?
Yeah.
All right. I thought it just meant like the way of resolving this was. Okay. Let us say that this machlekes between Abaya and Rava, do we go retroactively after school now? Shalom has to clean up from Shabbos. Okay. So let's say that the machlekes Abaya and Rava really goes back to an earlier machlekes Tanaim, right? The machlekes Abaya Rava now is, do we say Eid Zaymim is retroactive according to Abaya, or do we say that it's only from here and on? That's machlekes Tanaim. Okay, it's going to take us some time to get through this. It's going to go. We're not going to get the question till the bottom of the page, so we have to follow through. Two people testified that he stole. Talking about Shmerel over here. And they also testify that he slaughtered. And they became zaymamin about the stealing. How could you testify that on Monday? Still, really, on Monday you were with us. You say the whole thing is nullified. Okay, now what happens is they have to pay double to Shmerel because they testified that he stole. They wanted him to pay double. They have to pay the double. Let's say they didn't become zaymamin about the gneva. They only became zaymamin. How could you say that on Tuesday it got slaughtered? On Tuesday you were with us. Now he's a real ganav because he testified that he's a ganav. But the witnesses have to pay the three extra times. They have to pay the 3 extra times. You follow? They testified that he stole and slaughtered. They testified he stole on Monday, slaughtered on Tuesday. Witnesses come up and say, on Tuesday you were with us. That means that Shmerel is a real ganav because we have witnesses that say he stole on Monday. And the Edom Zayman have to pay the extra time because on Tuesday they became invalidated, right? They have to pay the 3 times. I'm Rabbi Yossi. That could only be that we're going to divide this up and say that Reuven's Shmerel's a ganav, but nevertheless he didn't slaughter it. That's because there were 2 separate testimonies from Reuven and Shimon. But if it would have been one testimony, the Nedish Batla Miktasa Batla Kula, then we would say that the fact that Reuven and Shimon became invalidated, they're invalidated from the whole testimony, and they won't even have to pay. And Shmerel won't even be a ganav. My b'shtei edius. What does it mean two testimonies? My beidus achas. What does it mean 1 testimony? Ilim b'shtei edus mamish. Are we talking about b'shtei kitais? Talking about two separate groups of witnesses. That what Rabbi Yossi means. That Reuben and Shimon came and testified that he stole, and Gad and Asher was the second one. Yeah, Gad and Asher came in and testified that he slaughtered. Beidus achas means v'vas achas, and what does it mean at one testimony? That means Beidus achas means bekat achas, means that it was one group. It was all Reuben and Shimon. But one after the other. They testified first about if they testified first about the stealing, and then they went on and testified about the slaughtering. Then Rabbi Yossi would say, if it's one group of witnesses, that when they testified about they testified first about the theft, then afterwards they testified about the slaughtering. Nevertheless, when they become zaymimin because of the slaughtering, it's as if they became invalid also for the first testimony that they made. The problem is, where do you get this from? Maybe on the first testimony they're actually valid, and on the second testimony they're invalid. They only become puzzle from that time and onwards. It must be that we're not talking about different groups of Edom. B'shtei edus means be'edus achas ken shtei edus. When we say two testimonies, we're talking about one group of witnesses that made two testimonies. How does that work? It's one group of witnesses, and it's a separation between the first testimony and the testimony. They testify about the stealing. They take a break. They testify about the slaughtering, and then they become zayman for the slaughtering. But if they take a break, then they don't become zayman for the stealing. But if there's no break, there's no break. It's all one testimony. Then we're going to say that the whole testimony is considered null. It considers zayman. Savrua, the Gemara now thinks the kuli alma teichidei dibur kedibur dami. The testimony was done teichidei dibur. He said that Shmerel stole and Shmerel slaughtered without taking a break in middle. And it's all considered one testimony. My labba kamifli, and the machlekes must be the Rabbanan sabri mikanal abba nifsal. The Rabbanan say that he's valid because they go from there and on. When does he become invalid? Only when Levi and Yehuda show up, they say that it's invalid. From the moment of when they become a zaymimin, that's when they become zaymimin. But for the stealing, they were never, for that testimony back then, they were never zaymimin. Layitzim. I gave it the laymitzim. Rabbi Yossi says no. Lemafreyahu nifsal. Rabbi Yossi says you would go back to the time of the testimony. That's when they become invalid. Given the miyad ki asidu the mifsli ki it's molatvicha it's molanami agneva datach kedibadam. We say that since both testimonies were within the same breath, sort of like, so then we say that since the second testimony they become zayman, they become pasul. So we put it under this category that the whole testimony they become pasul, and that's why Rabbi Yossi says that the whole testimony is invalid. Okay, so we say basically now that the machlekes Rabban and Rabbi Yossi is really a machlekes Abaye and Rava. Abaye says Abaye would follow the opinion of Rabbi Yossi that we go backwards, and Rava would follow the Rabbanan. Gemara says Amri, they said like this: if we hold that anything that's said within the same breath is considered is put together, then we would go back and say that the whole testimony is invalid. Here, actually, where the machlekes itself between Rabbanan and Rabbi Yossi is if we say teich kedei dibur, anything that's within the same phrasing is considered one dibur, one speech. Rabbanan sabri teich kedei dibur lav kedibur dami. The Rabbanan say that it's not considered one speech. Rabbi Yossi says that it is. It is one speech. The Gemara asks, Rabbi Yossi actually holds that anything that's said together is considered one testimony, one speech. But we have a Mishnah that says, someone has an animal, and he has actually has three animals. One animal is a oila, one animal is a shlamim, and then he has a regular animal, mundane animal, and he brings them this one animal next to the other two. He says, "Harezu tumura saila." This animal should be in place of the oila. Tumura shlamim should be in place of the shlamim. So what happens? So the Mishnah says, "Harezu tumura saila." Divra Meir. Meir says that we accept this first statement. Toughest lashon rishon. You would grab this first statement. It's an oila. It's already an oila. Too late. Nothing else he says afterwards matters. Rabbi Yossi says, if that's what he wanted to, what we say is that it actually becomes half oila, half shlamim. He was trying to say it all in one breath, but you can't speak two words in one breath, in one at the same time, like God, So it had to come out one after another. But if he said first oila v'nimlach, and then he changed his mind, he decided, he said, no, I don't want it to be an oil, I want it to be a shlamim, then haresu t'mura sayla, then it's too late. But we asked him that, nimlach pshita, obviously, he tries to change his mind, that's not going to work. Rav Papa says, nimlach teichadei dibar kamrinan. What we're talking about is that it was teichadei dibar, was within the few seconds. So, if that's the case, that Rabbi Yossi obviously holds that even within a few seconds, you can't change your mind because it's not considered, teichadei dibar is not considered like the same speech. Amri, so they answered like this. Teichadei dibar have teichadei dibar have chad kedei shilash talmud l'rav v'chad kedei shilash harav l'talmud. There's two types of teichadei dibar. One is the way the student says to his teacher, he's a shalom alecha rabbi, or shalom alecha rabbi umayri. Like that means peace unto you, my teacher, my master. And the other one is how the teacher says to the student, says peace unto you. Doesn't add in my student. So, ki lesli Rabbi Yossi kadei shilas talmud l'rav. Shalom alecha Rabbi Umayri. When does Rabbi Yossi say that it's not considered the same breath that you can change your mind? That's when the student is, if it would be the phrase that the student says to the teacher, that amount of time, which is maybe 3 seconds. Shalom alecha Rabbi Umayri. The nafish, much longer. However, Kedei Shilas Harav L'Talmud, which is Shalom Alecha, where he just says peace unto you, that Rabbi Yossi holds of, and that's what we're talking about over here. And that's why in this case, back over here, Rabbi Yossi says that it's one testimony and it becomes totally invalid. That's because it was the shorter Teichadei Dibur. In this case, where he says that he can't change his mind, even though it's Teichadei Dibur, that's because it was the longer Teichadei Dibur, which Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold of. So let's leave it over here.
So there's footnote 10 for that. It's disrespectful and forbidden for a student to greet his teacher simply in the manner that one greets his friend. Rather, he must note in his greeting that he is addressing